Well, I like to keep it colloquial, yes. So the question in everybody's mind right here is, how do we break into the business? So first, let's start with, how did you break into this business? Could you give us a small
You're
narrative?
going to have to say who talks.
Okay, so let's start with you, Linwood.
I can tell you right now that in terms of relevance, Sneha is going to be far more meaningful than David or I, because the business has just changed so much. I started out as an actor and just basically got a lottery ticket kind of good fortune. My second professional audition was for Little House on the Prairie, and I got a series gig out of it. Which is exactly my advice to every one of you. I went through about 6 years being able to feed my family, and then 3 years where I couldn't get arrested. So I started writing seriously. I'd done it sort of as a lark, sometimes as a protest against how horrible the scripts I was given as an actor were. And I wrote a spec script for the series Cheers, which was then a brand new show. And it was a time when they were hiring basically anyone who could type at the television networks. Cosby had just started, so everyone wanted somebody in half-hour comedy, and the standards were pretty low. And since I was already in the business and knew a bunch of agents, it was fairly easy entree for me. I worked on staff on a show called Silver Spoons, which at the time was arguably the worst show on television, the worst written show on television, with a really horrible, tyrannical showrunner. I was able, through really nothing but the kindness of the executives at Embassy Television who were producing it, to get out of that show after doing it for a year. Went to night court and did that for 2 years, and through, again, a series of very lucky circumstances, was running it the second year of the show, and then just kind of went on from there. So it's really, it's kind of like saying I won the lottery and you can too, in terms of how you get there.
All right. So in order to take your advice, I think we should go with David next. Sneha.
I will say I think my advice is still relevant.
Okay, good.
Just because I think my path is slightly more traditional in that I moved out to LA after I graduated college, and I got a job as working on a TV show. I just, my first advice to anybody who wants to work in TV is just get as close to the people who are doing the job you want to be doing as possible. And I knew I wanted to be a writer, so I was just like, well, I wanted to get, be around the writers. And you can either get a PA job or a writer's assistant job. And the better job is the writer's assistant job, because you're actually in the room with the writers every day, watching the process unfold. And it's just like, it's like going to a vocational school for writing. So I'd recommend getting that job, or a PA job, which is basically getting coffee and lunch for the writers. And it's a grunt work, but it's again, it's great exposure. It's a great way to just be in the environment, see the process, and then there are people there. If you work hard and you're smart and you're enthusiastic, people will want to help you. They know you're not there to spend your life typing or getting coffee. They know you want to be a writer. And people will mentor you. People will read what you've written. And if you're writing, which you should always just be writing. Eventually, somebody will read something, and if you're any good, they'll help you. And that's what happened for me. I came out of college. I got a job as a writer's assistant on a show, and eventually, I started writing, and somebody read something I wrote that they liked, and they gave it to their agent. And their agent liked it, and that's how I got my first job. But I really do think, like, if you don't know anybody, if you're not connected, if you don't get cast in Little House on the Prairie, I really do think being just working on a show, just getting in any way you can, you know, as an assistant or a PA is a great way to expose yourself to the people who do it and impress them, and hopefully that leads to opportunities.
So which show did you get your first opportunity?
I'm going to date myself here. It's a show called Anything But Love. It was Jamie Lee Curtis and Richard Lewis were the stars. It was a romantic comedy. And actually the very first actual professional writing job I ever got was the show, every episode opened with what's called a cold opening, which is a 2-minute scene that starts the show, and it had nothing to do with the rest of the episode, but it was the two main characters, Richard Lewis and Jamie Lee Curtis, in a diner having breakfast. And the writers hated writing them because they weren't relevant to the rest of the show, and they were just they just hated them. So after 6 months there, the showrunner said, if you want to try writing these, we'll give you $500 if we use them and shoot them. So that night I went home and wrote like 15 of them, and he's like, I'm not going to read 15 of these. Pick your favorite 4 and whatever. And so he,
Peter?
Peter Noah, yeah. Who went on to do The West Wing, great guy and really talented. And so he read them. At the end of the day, he called me into his office and he said, "You're a writer." And I said, "What does that mean?" He's like, "These are good." He's like, "You can write." He's like, "You either can do it or you can. You can do it." And they bought one and they filmed. And I was like, "Oh, I'm on my way." And so then I wrote a script. And a month later, I gave him the script, and he read it. He said, "This is terrible." He said, "Start over." And I did. I started over, and it took a couple years, but eventually, I managed to get my first writing staff job on another terrible show.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Getting as close to the writers' room as possible is a great way to go. I got a PA job on Warehouse 13 on Sci-Fi through a friend of a friend, because I had interned around town for free for a while I was in grad school and before grad school. So I got a PA job at Warehouse 13, and then while I was on the show, a friend of mine from grad school got a manager. And he was just starting out as a manager. He'd been a producer in town for a while, and he was just starting out, and she was his first client. And we workshop our stuff together, so she would always tell me, "I think that you should send this script to my manager." And I was like, "I don't know if your managers are legit or not. Like, I'm not sure. Like, what is, okay, well, let's give it a shot, because no one's banging down my door to represent me." So I gave him the script. We met, and he had the most amazing notes. And I thought, okay, well, at least this is someone that I want to work with. And I became his second client. And he ended up getting me repped at UTA, and this was towards the end of my PA job, like we're getting ready to go on hiatus. So I was thrilled, because I had agents. It was like the big thing, the big first step to breaking into the industry. And went on hiatus, and I was unemployed, and you know how little PA jobs pay when you're just getting lunch and coffee for everyone, and driving around town trying to carry a box of 14 lunches for the writer's room. So we went on hiatus, and I was like, oh, I got to file for unemployment. And I was chasing down this writer's assistant job for a different show, and one of my idols was running the room. So I was like, I really want to get an interview at least with this writer. And I interviewed for the job, and there was somebody else that I was competing with who had been a writer's assistant on a bunch of different shows. So he had like a writing all of his notes samples that he had given to this showrunner. And I was like, I can't compete with this. Like I've written 3 pages while the writer's assistant was in the bathroom, because I was the PA on this show that I can give you that I wrote notes for. So she was like, I really like you, but could you come in on Monday and just audition for note taking? So I'm going to talk to my assistant out loud for an hour. And could you come in and just take notes? And I was like, okay, I can take notes. That's fine. I got an MFA. I could do that. Like, all right, I'll come back on Monday. And that was a Thursday. But the very next day, I got a phone call from my agents saying that, okay, the showrunners on The Americans read you, and they want to have a phone interview with you in like an hour. And I was just floored, because it just sort of came out of nowhere. I mean, I had read The Americans pilot script a year before, just to like be educated on what was out there. and what was getting made. And I thought it was great, and I was like, it would be so killer to write on this show. It's never going to happen. And I had gotten rep by UTA about maybe a month after like the traditional staffing season ended for the year. So they said, we can't really put you up for any of the shows, but we can try for some cable stuff that staffs in New York. And I was like, that's never going to happen. Like the two shows that were out there were maybe Boardwalk Empire and The Americans, and I just didn't expect that would happen. So when they called me, I was just really thrown for a loop, and I was like, okay, I have an hour to prepare for this. I was in my pajamas because it was hiatus. So I was, okay, I got to figure out how to prepare for this. I reread the pilot, and I got on the phone with them, and we talked for 30 minutes. And it was a lot about like my own life and how I may be related to these two characters that were immigrants, and my parents were in an arranged marriage, so I played that up because Elizabeth and Philip Jennings are in an arranged marriage, and so I talked to them for 30 minutes, and I was like, okay, I think I did okay. I didn't sound like a complete idiot, so I went to walk my dog, and literally as I was picking up his dog shit, I get a call from my agent saying, you got the job. And I was like, this is great. I got to put this somewhere. And so the catch was that it was Friday evening in LA, and I had to start at Monday morning in New York City. So I had 2 days to pack up all of my stuff and figure out how to get there. And I was like, I just have to make it happen. It's your first staffing gig, and you just have to kind of drop everything and make it happen. And luckily, I had a friend in New York whose couch I could crash on, because they don't really help you out with that. They're just like, well, you got the job, so you just figure it out. And so that was a really crazy, exciting ride. But you make it work. And it was a really interesting room. It was like 6 of us, and that was kind of the start of it. And you feel like, okay, so I got into this club, this really exclusive club, and you're just trying not to get kicked out. Like that's kind of your entire career. You're just hoping to stay in the club. So that's what I've been trying to do.
Okay, so there are, according to what we've talked a little prior to this panel, there are 2 possible jobs or 2 possible skills that you need when you are on television and in a writing path. First one is to become a writer and be part of the writer room, right? The other one would be developing. Do you need different skills for those, or is it the same thing?
Oh God, yeah, they're very different.
Yes.
I mean, there's more than 2 skills. I mean,
yeah,
there's one thing being on staff and just being a contributing writer, and in comedy, it's even, you can be more specific. Like there are people who are on staff who are just joke people. Like they're funny. They can't write a script to save their lives. They're not great with story, but they're really, really funny. And like in a writer's room, that can actually be enough. I wouldn't recommend it, but like a lot of stand-ups end up doing working in TV that way, and then you can develop the skills you need as a writer. But then so being able to participate in the writer's room, and then it's a whole other set of skills to be able to run a writer's room, to oversee a group of like 8 or 10 or 6 or 15 people, and draw from them the best, and keep out the worst, and focus them and organize them. It's a very unique set of skills, and it's not always a skill set that is.
It's a producer,
right.
It's a producer skill set, right. Not a writer skill set.
And then there's a whole other set of skills, which is the business side of things, which is producing and overseeing the budget, and you're overseeing it's a multi-million-dollar operation. And then development is a whole other thing, which is because when you're working on a show, it's like something that already exists, but like what Linwood has done, which is just create something out of whole cloth, like out of thin air, and it's just like it exists only in your mind, and you've got to convince people to spend millions of dollars to make it, and that's a whole another set of skills entirely. So I mean, the breadth and depth of skills it's way more than 2. And again, you don't have to have them all, but yeah, the more you have, the better off you're going to be.
It's also very idiosyncratic. I mean, every boss I've had a different set of criteria that they assumed were the absolute bedrock, should apply everywhere, and every one of them was different,
right.
I've had bosses that thought that the guys that only did jokes were completely worthless and basically a distraction in the room. Like if you've got a script to go out and you've got to fix a scene, you're shooting it the next day and it has to be fixed because the motivations of the characters don't work and there's a real story problem. There's a real story problem or character problem. And some guy is just like, quack, 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 and he's just sitting in the room distracting everybody. Other times there are people that think those guys are crucial and they think of it as like the room is like really flagging in energy and no one is producing anything and you got to get out of there and at least this guy is he's basically doing a stand-up routine in the room and at least he's getting people laughing and giving them energy and so it really it's a very I think wrongly idiosyncratic purpose. I think show business in general caters to people way too much when you're in it and you're making any kind of money. That basically any kind of personality flaw can then become like a management philosophy.
Yeah.
It's just because that's the boss. So every creepy thing he says, every bigoted mental image he has becomes like that's the way you make a show, and it's just. It's a little bit disheartening.
So my question then would be, which one would be your worst writer's room experience? And then which one would be your best writer's room experience? So trying to find, of those different experiences and idiosyncrasies, which one is the one that you really like and the one that you really wouldn't want to do again in your own room?
I bet the best for you is Malcolm in the Middle.
Well, actually, no, it's not, because I think I'm an A+ writer, and I think I'm an A producer, and I think I'm a B- boss. Honestly, the best writing room experience I had was a guy named Matthew Carlson, who I have 4 or 5 friends that we've just sort of hired each other because of the way the business has worked. One of us would have a show that they were running, and then the other 3 or 4 of us wouldn't, and so we all go work on each other's shows. So we sort of had this rotating series of like, okay, he's the boss this time, he's the boss this time, she's the boss this time. And the best was when Matthew Carlson was running the room because he just had those skills. Right. Where he could, it's a question of being demanding enough that you're getting the best out of everybody without being like so directive on things that are really subjective, that are just matters of personal opinion after all, that you're, crushing everyone, or, which is the more common sin, just keeping everyone there till 3 a.m.
What show was this?
Oh, no, specifically, I'll tell you the worst experience was on Silver Spoons. We had this guy who was, I don't know why I'm avoiding saying his name. His name was Stephen Pritzker, and he's just the most horrible human being in my life. And he had this great tell that tells you everything you want to know about his characters. He had a really big comb over. Really bad. And this was 85, the time of the comb over was sort of passing him by. And he was very nervous about it, and you could see he always wanted to check it hadn't flopped over the wrong way. But he was smart enough to know he shouldn't do that, so what he would do is he would do this. He'd go, and it was such a weird, I would have loved to play poker with this guy. But anytime anything would threaten his ego, he'd do that. And this guy would just hammer. We were in the room, and again, it's Silver Spoons. It's a show for little kids, and not even a particular, anything on Nickelodeon or Disney Channel today is leagues better than Silver Spoons was then. And we were in a room at 3 a.m., and Ricky was doing something that he'd done 500 times before, and he was talking about this girl, and it was about, I hope I can get Becky to go to the prom. And he was like, what's Becky or Betty? And he said that at 3 a.m., and at 4:30, he still hadn't decided whether it should be Becky or Betty.
Ouch.
You know, and I was just like, okay, I quit.
I think
That was the worst.
I think you're like as a lower level. I'm still trying to like figure out which leadership styles I want to adopt once I get to that point. But it's like it's just different. I mean, people just have like for the Americans, it was a small room, so it's just governed by different rules. Then, for example, Believe was like 13 of us or something, and Constantine was also pretty similar. It was like 10 of us. So for the Americans, we didn't spend as much time all together in the room. We had like a couple things that we were going to do at the end of the time together, and then we would come back with answers to those questions or whatever we had talked about the day before. Hopefully we'd moved on to a different episode or whatever, and one of the writers would go off and handle it on their own. And with Believe, it was more regimented. It was 10 to 6, and it was every day, and you're eating lunch together too, so it was just different. And I think it just depends on the needs of the show. Like Constantine, which was supposed to be 22 episodes but ended up being 13, you have more of like people can go off and do their episode because it's more procedural, and you don't have to be in the room together breaking story constantly because it's not so serialized. So it's just kind of interesting how different people decide to run their rooms, but they all yield kind of different results with the particular writers that you have. Like some people need to be in the room constantly in order to like have someone to bounce their ideas off of, and some people just don't, and they prefer to work alone. I think it's just dependent on the personalities.
Oh, that's really good. And Dave?
Yeah, I've worked on several shows where I worked on the show as one of the writers, and then I ended up in later seasons actually running the show. And like it's almost like how everybody says, and everybody loves the backup quarterback. Like once you're running a show, it's tough to be really just beloved because you're just saying no a lot, and you're in charge, and you got to make 1,000 decisions a day, and you can't always think about everybody's feelings when you're making them. And so it's more fun, frankly, to not be running the show, to just work on it. But when you're running the show, it's very satisfying, and it's really, for better or for worse, like what you see on TV is absolutely everything you thought should be on TV. And that's, because in TV, what's wonderful about it is you really are the writer, the director, the producer. I mean, you are fully in charge of what goes on screen. It really is a writer's medium in an incredible way, and so yeah. I mean, it's worth it. It's running shows is worth it, but it's I wouldn't say it's as much fun as just being on a staff and being a part of the team, and when the showrunner leaves the room, getting to bitch and moan about what a shitty job that person's doing and how much better you'd all be doing at it. But they're both great, and I've worked on many shows also where I've worked for incredibly talented people. But I worked on a show where we'd come in at 10, and we literally wouldn't start working until 5 o'clock.
Oh,
We'd order lunch, we'd play foosball. It was crazy, but like it's
those are the people that hate their wives or hate their kids.
It's up to the showrunner's eccentricity. Whatever that person decides, like ultimately they're in charge, and it's a little dictatorship. And so, 5 o'clock, you start working, and you just work through the night. And look, SNL have been doing that for 40 years, and it's worked out okay for them. So I guess everybody has their methods, but yeah, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I think
prefer to do
the
that.
most important thing is that you really can't, like your first job or your first experience in that is to really realize like it's a reflection of the personality of the person who's running it. It is not a rule book that's been developed by some smart committee somewhere.
But it's also that personality adapting to the room. If it's a different show, then you have to be a different show.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have your antenna out, and I think especially nowadays, the business is so different, and the opportunities are so much broader now that a lot of 95% of my career completely meaningless today in terms of applicability. The 5% that's meaningful is really working hard to make something interesting. But the structure of it and the avenues for revenue and those kind of things and the opportunities for where to work are so different now.
And I can take out from what you're saying two skills that I think are important. If you are going to be a showrunner, you have to be able to read the room, understand what your show is about, and then decide what kind of leadership do you want to enforce, right? Also, the other thing I'm seeing is for the writers, how to take criticism and how to approach the showrunner. That's usually going to be telling you, no, that's not good, do it again, right? Those two, would you agree that those two characteristics for these two different paths would be really necessary? What other skills do you think that the writer would need and then the showrunner would need?
I would say for a writer, I mean, for one thing, just attitude, like just being excited and enthusiastic and positive. Like that goes from PA to assistant to like, it's amazing how far that will go just in terms of endearing you to the people around you. And like, if you just, they're hard jobs to, you know, it's hard to make a TV show every week. And so to be around people who are excited and enthusiastic and wanting to help you, wanting to make your you know, life better, wanting to make your show better, like it just means the world. So I mean, obviously talent and hard work, but I think a good attitude and just enthusiasm really just goes a long way in terms of just like, first of all, just in terms of your own life, just focus on doing good work and being positive about it, but also just in terms of affecting all the people around you and making people want to work with you, you know.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to work with an asshole, and if you get that kind of reputation, it's really tough to get that next job. You spend so much time with these people that you just, at the end of the day, want someone that you can stand, you know.
Yeah. Do you think it's more important than sometimes the talent? Would you choose one or the other?
No, I'd rather have a talented asshole. I really would.
Okay.
Yeah, I really would.
Although, you know,
great.
by
Yeah.
the time you're getting up into people that have been staffed, and especially if they're in their second year of the thing, the talent level is already sort of like, that's stipulated.
It's a given.
You know, it's a given. So that like, and there's tons of people that feel like their talent entitles them to, you know, and they're right for a little while as long as they're making other people giant sums of money, but then, you know, the nicer people last a little longer.
They really do. It really does. It really makes a difference. I know some very talented people who just, yeah, they can't get hired because they've just burned too many bridges. You know, and in a, you know, aggressively unpleasant way. Yeah, they can't quite, you know. And again, it doesn't always track. You know, if like people are neurotic writers who sit at home and think creative thoughts, it's like, it doesn't mean they're going to be incredibly social animals, and yet a writer's room is an incredibly social place. Like you're in a room all day with 8, 10 other people, and so if you don't have social skills, if you don't know how to read social cues and understand when somebody doesn't want to be picked on, or you know, or when somebody wants to be, you know, shown some respect, like it can do real damage to your ability to function and to have a career.
And I'm impressed on how many shows have survived, even the disintegration, complete disintegration of the staff. Things like Believe, you know,
Yeah.
you don't have a showrunner. You have how many showrunners do you have?
We had 4.
Four.
So
Wow.
4 showrunners.
4 for a 13-episode order, and we were there for 9 months. So
That's a mess.
it was a mess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then
mess.
The Walking Dead fired everybody on after 3rd season, and then they hired a new one, and then it was there for 2 seasons, and fired everybody again. And so that kind of thing, it tells you that sometimes the show is more important than the staff.
Yeah.
Oh, always.
I mean, the thing that's making the money is the thing that's always going to be the most important to everybody. You know?
Yes.
So like, the minute you do anything that threatens anyone else's money, you are gone. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Right. I always, you know, one thing I always say is like, you know, it's like, if it's me and the star, there's one person who's definitely not getting fired, and that's the star of the show. It's like they're not. They ultimately do, like, you know, they're not going to get rid of the star. So it's like you are expendable. You know, I mean, you can be incredibly important to the process and be contributing mightily, but like if ultimately you really have a falling out with the star or the studio or the network, I mean, you are ultimately disposable.
So you have to choose your battles, but also you have to learn how to be creative within the confines of what they're asking you to do, which is particularly different this day and age because a lot of the shows are based on comic books or they're based on telenovelas from Latin America. or right?
Yeah, although I think, the staff thing has always been about, like, you're adapting your own creative instincts to try and channel somebody else's voice.
Yes.
Like, there's a thing. Some showrunners want a joke to be ba da ba ba da ba ba da ba bing, and some other showrunners want it to be ba ba ba. And it's just a completely subjective thing, and you succeed as a staff writer and in a writer's room by sort of inhabiting whichever one you're in the room with who's holding the pencil, the one who's in charge. And it's the same thing where you're adapting a book or anything else. It's about having your antenna out and being willing to sort of channel somebody else.
It's interesting because then this is more about breaking into the business these days. You learn how to write spec scripts of other shows, but really, like, a lot of showrunners right now seem to want to read your original work so that they know that you have a voice. But ultimately, your job is to channel your showrunner's voice into the script. But you do have to have that, like, original voice that pops, that gives you value to the room regardless, and then you have to do your job, which is the showrunner's voice.
Okay, so we want to open it up for Q&A from the audience. If you have a question, please make your way to the left of the auditorium where there is a microphone, and so we can hear your question. And in the meantime, while we are getting those questions, I think that my question would be then, it's hard to adapt to the person who's running the show. It's hard for the showrunner to adapt to a concept that's already being developed, like Constantine or like Jane the Virgin, or is it easier to develop your own?
I would say my friend created Jane the Virgin, which I'm currently working on, and she heard the concept and she thought, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. There's no way. And then she sat with it for a night and found a way to kind of make it her own thing. Like, okay. She didn't watch she knew the concept of it, but she just, and once she found it, kind of made it personal to her and really kind of found ways to relate to the character, and it became its own thing. And so ultimately, if you're adapting something, it's got to become yours, So, I mean, I feel like, look, it's a great head start. Like, if you have something and it's already a sellable concept and something that's marketable, and then you can find a way to personalize it and really relate to it, I mean, to me, that's way better way easier than having to start from nothing.
For Constantine, we sort of had a built-in audience with fans of the Hellblazer comics and DC fans in general. I think we just fell in love with the character. I think for sure our showrunner did, because those comics are really dark and the character is really interesting and irreverent. So I think it wasn't hard for him to make it his own, and then we just took it upon ourselves to write for this great character.
All right, excellent. Oh, okay. So we have a question.
Hi, mine's kind of more directed towards Linwood. I'm sorry. Just because I had started out as acting too, and I kind of just fell into writing, and I know that it certainly makes me approach writing differently, having that predominantly been an actor and having that experience before. How do you think that your acting experience has sort of helped you and hindered you as a writer?
I'm not quite so cavalier about writing dialogue that is really difficult to say. That there's times when, as a writer, you've got, some exposition that it would really make the rest of your job so much easier if you could just have, Mrs. McPipe come out and lay the pipe for you and just sort of say one line of dialogue, that's just gets it out of the way. And you'll see that sometimes, on a show, you'll see somebody, just a very clunky line of dialogue, and I really admire the actors that can power through that stuff. I was a very limited actor in terms of talent for especially that kind of stuff. So that's really the only thing that I think it gave me any special consideration, was just, not being too cavalier about, hard to say dialogue. Yeah.
I feel for the guys in the Big Bang Theory. But they have to say all those big words. It's really
It's very easy as a writer to sit in the writer's room and be like, oh, I can't believe they messed it up, and it's just, and then you try I once was sitting, we're shooting a scene, and I was talking to the director, and I'm just like, just have the actor say it this way, and I said it that way. And the director's like, oh, well, I'll just, and brought the actor over. And I'm like, no, no, no. And so brought the actor over, and now the actor and the crew are all standing around waiting. And she's like, oh, go ahead, do it like you want to do it. And I just like tried to do it like 4 times, and it just was terrible. It was humiliating. I was like, I'm never doing that again. But it's really, their work, it's supposed to look effortless, but what they do is just incredible.
Yeah.
Hi. So it's been really interesting to hear how people love talented people, but they also really like people that they can just stand working with. So I want to know if there are any real golden rules that you can do as an individual in the writer's room to make it a more creative and positive space to be in.
That's a good question. Don't interrupt the showrunner. And don't interrupt other people. Like it's funny. People have ideas, and they really just. People who tend to step on other people while they're trying to talk drives people crazy. And as Peter Noah once said to me, everyone knows where the joke isn't. Like telling somebody like that's not funny or that's not working, or like being the guy or the woman in the room who's really negative, not a great quality. And being supportive of other people's ideas, trying to like, even if you don't think the idea is perfect, trying to hear that idea and think of a way to build on that, like as they say in improv, yes and, as opposed to saying no. Like, try to be supportive, like be a good teammate. I think that's really, really a big thing. Is just trying to like hear the good in other people.
I mean, as a lower level, I think knowing yourself is really helpful. If you know you're an asshole, maybe like work on yourself or curtail some of your impulses to be an asshole. But if you know that you have trouble speaking up, like that's something you need to work on, your nerves or speaking in front of people, like just know yourself and figure out your place in the room. Also have your antenna up so you know when you can speak. And don't just find holes in things, try and find solutions when you bring up stuff. It's still important to point out what isn't going to work down the line, but if you don't have a solution, no one's going to want to hear it, because basically you're just shitting on their ideas.
Yeah. I saw, and I think if that's your priority, is to like, how can I be productive in this room, and thinking about knowing yourself is that's a good piece of advice. Like, I knew someone who was very nervous about talking, and so he just sort of whispered to the person next to him, and then that person who loved to talk, would pitch it, and we all sort of knew. Yeah. Well, that was Larry. It wasn't Gary doing it. It was Larry. That was Larry's. So he got the credit for it and everything. But that was just the way he figured out how to do it. He was working with what he knew about himself.
So I think we don't have any more time for questions. We've eaten up all our time, which is great. I would like to, if you have any final advice that you could give to the audience, what would be?
Mine would be just make stuff. Like, there's no excuse. If you want to be a writer, write. And when you can film stuff. I mean, you can make stuff on your iPhone that looks as good as anything. And just create. And I find that the people who are smart and talented and passionate about TV end up working successfully in TV. I really think it's a great career, and there's a tremendous opportunity. But you have to have passion, and you have to have a good attitude, and you have to have talent. But talent can be developed. It doesn't. The first thing you write is going to suck, but it will get better.
Love what you do. Do it for the love of it. If you feel like you deserve to be staffed, there's no such thing as deserve. A lot of my friends should be staffed, and they're not staffed. Just do it for the love of it, and never be complacent. Just keep working at it. That's my advice. Yeah.
I also think that if you want to do in network TV, you better hurry, because I have a running bet with my wife, what's going to die first, network television or me? It's going to be within 2 or 3 years either way. It's a very near thing. It is crumbling. Everyone is panicking. The financial model doesn't make sense anymore. It's just not going to be there in maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years, but it's going out into these other places. And you know, if you have something you care about and you want to say it, make sure you're doing that. You know, it's a very difficult thing to make happen. You know, luck is a big part of this, and you know, you don't want to be spending your life hoping for a lucky break doing stuff you hate. You know, like you might as well be doing something you like, because that has just as good a chance as doing something that you think everybody else wants you to do.
Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us, and I think we can thank them too.
Thank you guys.
My pleasure.